This is Grief and Grit, from heartache to high fives with a dash of sass. The podcast that turns the tables on traditional grief talks with a fresh, sassy spin. Listen in for candid conversations about the messy, awkward, and downright hilarious aspects of dealing with loss. Because sometimes the best way to cope is with a little laughter and a lot of grit.
Hi,
Hi,
I'm Greer.
and I'm Simonie.
We're so glad you're here. And today we're talking about
Secondary losses. So, in today's episode, we're going to delve into, and Greer, you and I spoke about this just last week, what the secondary losses mean when you've lost a spouse. You suddenly find yourself widowed. And besides the emotional loss and the physical loss, what are the secondary losses that come with it? And although we're going to be speaking to the widow side of it, of course, we're going to be speaking as well to all the secondary losses that we go through. People go through that not necessarily involve someone dying. So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. So
Yeah. And we're going to cover a good number of them, but there are so many secondary losses out there. We're going to do what we can to cover them, but we don't want to minimize others that we may not be mentioning.
absolutely. And we're going to go through them kind of step by step and what that secondary loss is, what it means to us.
Mhm.
So, everybody, as usual, grab your cup of tea and let's get started. Get yourselves comfortable and let's get started. So yeah, for me, looking back, I think for me is a big one was the loss of dreams for the future.
Mhm.
Here you meet your person, you date, you get engaged, you get married, and everything about your life when you get married is all about the future. What will that look like? We're going to have children. We're going to buy a house. We're going to have jobs. We're going to, that vision of getting old, sitting on the porch on your rocking chairs and reminiscing about your life and looking forward to the future with grandchildren and all things that future comes with.
Mhm.
And then
I know for me, loss of hopes and dreams it kind of came in very odd ways. Like Jared and I, we were blessed with two beautiful, healthy babies. And Jared was very adamant that we were done having children. But for some reason, after his death, when I would see someone pregnant, it would just crush me. And it's not that we were going to have more kids, but I think maybe it was just there was not even a possibility anymore.
correct.
And, I think that was really, really hard. And, for us, Jared died in 2021, right? And we had gotten COVID vaccines. And the day he died, we actually were supposed to go on our first date night in a restaurant in over a
Right.
year.
Wow.
And it's just those little things, those hopes and dreams that we just kept talking about after COVID, moving into the new house and all of these things. And it's those long-term dreams, it's the short-term dreams, it's the dreams we
Absolutely.
have for the kids and just everything.
Absolutely. It's that building a future together. It's, it is.
Right.
It's everything. And then suddenly it's not.
Right.
And then you kind of left with this future on your own. And, but I think for me, and maybe because it's been so long for me, I have realized, and for anyone out there, who's listening and in the same situation, you can start building your own future. You can build a new future. It's different
Mhm.
and it won't necessarily have the same things in it, but it is a future that you can build for yourself, and you can create your new dreams of what that is going to look like. If you had trips planned and suddenly you don't have any, you don't have that trip anymore together, but it's still okay to take that trip on your own.
Right.
Take it with someone, go on your own, find a tour. Try a new restaurant.
Right. I had a mentor at work, and we had a very challenging project. It was a long-term project. It involved many stakeholders in different regions, and a lot of people had a lot of opinions. And there would be setbacks with this project, and I would get so frustrated. And I just remember my mentor saying, you know, there are so many curveballs. This is like a roller coaster. It's going to do loops. It's going to do hoops. It's going to do all the things. And we don't know how we're going to get there and how many turns, but we're going to get there.
Right.
And, it's interesting because in that project changed and morphed into different things. And, I had to be adaptable. I had to be agile. And that's life.
Exactly.
We plan for how we're going to get to a certain point, and the reality is the how changes, the what changes, the where changes. And, at the end of the day, you have a finished product that looks completely different from what you expected, but it can still be beautiful. It can still work incredibly well. It could even be better than what we originally dreamed. We just don't know.
We don't know. And we have to be able to give ourselves that opportunity to allow new dreams and a new life to begin.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So that was a big one for me. And I'm sure that you all out there listening can attest to that.
So then we have the loss of our main support system. And this hurts the most sometimes.
Yeah.
They're, oftentimes these people, whether it's a spouse, a parent, a partner, a sibling, a best friend, they are our biggest cheerleader.
Correct.
In all aspects of life. And when you lose that, that is really, really hard.
I know it's really hard. And I remember so specifically coming home from Mark's funeral, and I walked into the house and I was like, okay, like you're meant to be here to comfort me. You're meant to be here to tell me it's all going to be okay. This is wrong. Like, where are you? And that for me was like, oh my goodness, he's not there for that anymore.
It's so true. I think I've mentioned this before, but my grandmother passed away on the eve of the first anniversary of Jared's death. And I just I was heartbroken that my grandmother was gone, but my emotions, it was really hard for me to feel, because in many ways I was more upset that Jared wasn't there to support me at the funeral and through the loss, and that I actually couldn't be more upset over losing my grandma. This was my last grandparent.
Right.
That was a big deal.
Right.
And it just, there was this cloud, because I didn't have my person.
Your person. Exactly.
My rock.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have been so privileged, as you know, I have my mom who's been living with me for all these years since Mark died, and she is definitely my main support system.
Yeah.
But there's still so much of what I would love Mark still to be part of, and decision making. And, we can't rely on our children.
Right.
They're not meant to be our support systems. Their support systems. So, and I think it's also important to, be vulnerable and reach out. And I have incredible friends and family, and I've had to learn to, reach out to them in the bad days, let them know, I'm having a bad day. I need support. And I think it's important to figure out your new support system, rely on your new support system. But for me, that was really, really hard. Like that was, I've lost my main person.
Yeah.
And how do I find a new support system?
Right. Right. And in some ways, this also kind of segues into the financial piece. Financial is a massive secondary loss for when a person loses a spouse. In some situations, maybe they have come into a lot of money because of life insurance. In unfortunately many more situations, there is possibly the loss of a breadwinner, the loss of a contributor. I just kept telling myself, thank God I didn't have to go and get a second or third job. Thank God that I was able to move into the house with the kids and I didn't have to just turn around and sell it because I couldn't afford it. I do still need to work, and I do need to do things that are challenging for me from that financial perspective. But the reality is, you know, we the financial piece in our society changes us so much. It becomes financial decisions. These were things that Jared and I would discuss together.
Right.
It was also something that we argued a lot about.
Sure.
For those that know me, I do like to shop and I like to get new clothes and shoes and all the things. And that changed after Jared died. But it also changed the dynamic of like, I didn't have Jared, looking at a shopping bag when I came, what is that?
Right.
So, in keeping me in check. And for me now, making all the financial decisions, this is not my world. I am the first to admit finances in many ways a foreign language to me. Like I know how much money there is, but in terms of budgeting, like budgeting is just a goal.
Right. No, and I'm the same. I mean, I always joke and I tell people I come from a theater background and drama. Mark was the accountant, so we couldn't have been further apart when it came to finances. And he would give me a credit card and he would say, just remember, it's not a target, it's a limit. And then all of a sudden, he wasn't around, and I was thrown into this new world, as you say, new world of finances. Had
Yeah.
to teach myself, read books. Susie Orman, for anyone who knows, is my financial guru. She taught me so much from the beginning, just reading her books. So that was a huge loss and something that I had to teach myself and become part of a world that is not natural to me.
Right. And I will say widowhood disproportionately impacts women. Sadly, I think the ratio is like 3-1 for widows to widowers, so female to men. And that, when you think about the stereotypical roles in relationships, and while I hate that this is reality, in many cases, it is actually reality where possibly the female or one of the partners in the relationship is not involved in knowing the decisions or I'm sorry in knowing the finances, knowing where the bank accounts are,
Correct.
knowing the passwords and all of these things. And I will tell you, thankfully, Jared and I, it was not very secure. I do not recommend this, but we had a Google sheet where we would just list all of the accounts and our passwords. Thankfully, we had a relationship where we could even include email passwords.
Right.
And we knew each other's phone codes. And, having that information after he died, thank God, because there were so many situations where I needed his phone for the two-factor authentication to access different accounts.
Right.
And to change the contact information
Correct.
to my information. So, this is something that I am very passionate about. But also having a financial advisor can help with a lot of the account information. I remember when I met with mine, he knew about a couple of investment accounts that I didn't remember.
Right.
So that was money that, could have been just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
So having all of that and being open. If you don't know the answers, ask the questions to make sure you get the answers.
Absolutely. And having a plan is so important. And that's where a financial advisor comes in, because he or she puts everything in black and white, and you have a goal and you have a plan. And that helps relieve some of the anxiety surrounding the loss.
Right. Another really big one is loss of intimacy. It could be physical touch. It could be the shared secrets and the inside jokes. It could be those shared experiences of possible co-parenting, or you remembering the things that your child did after the loss of a child. There are so many different ways that we experience intimacy in our lives, and our person, our rock.
Mm-hmm.
Losing that person is crushing.
So for me, a big one as well was loss of faith. And I'm sure for a lot of people, your faith definitely gets questioned when something huge happens to you. We were a typical, we all believe, a family who believed in God. We followed the laws of our religion, Judaism. And suddenly Mark got ill and then he died. And it really rocks your faith, because it's like, why? Why did this happen? I did everything that I was supposed to do. I prayed, I believed everything, and yet he was still taken from us. And I think that rocked me for quite a long time. I would question over and over again, why? And of course, you don't get the answers to that, because none of us know why. But then I realized that I really did. I was left with so many blessings just in my 4 children. I had security. I was lucky I had financial security. So these were all blessings. Yes, I couldn't question why God had done this. I had no right to question. But after visiting with my rabbi, and you can visit with a priest, reading some books, realizing that I had so much still to be grateful for, and finding a purpose. I think that's the most important thing, is to find, we're never going to know the why. We're never going to have that answer, but we can find a purpose. So for me, it definitely brought me back to my faith. It rocked it for a while, but then when you realize what's still in your life and what we still have so much to be grateful for, it brings you back to that point of, okay, God's not so bad after all.
Right. For me, it was a little different. I grew up, I'm Jewish. Jared was agnostic, still observed Judaism from a cultural standpoint. And I've always known that bad things happen to good people. I have a sister with cerebral palsy. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Bad things happen, and quite frankly, there's no why, in terms of there's not a good reason that you can give me for these things to have had happened in life. And, that is one of the things that I hate. Everyone says, or so many people say, everything happens for a reason. And that it's just one of my triggers. I appreciate where they're coming from, but no. I don't believe that, God took away my husband from me and my children, and my kids now have to grow up without their dad. I don't believe that that was a conscious decision, and that decision was better than leaving him here on earth.
Absolutely.
A lot of people disagree with that, and that's okay. That's the point. We all believe what we believe, and that is very different. Everyone has a very unique relationship with their God or with their religion or with some form of higher power, whether that's nature, whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
My spirituality and my faith has changed. I am still very much Jewish and a cultural Jew, and I'm not super religious, but I appreciate the lessons that Judaism has taught. And I also really appreciate the signs that I see, and that has brought me back to believing. I
Right.
see cardinals, and we'll do another episode on this. This is something that I get really excited about, are the signs.
Right. Right.
But that's my faith. I believe in those things. I believe that there is a message that we're getting, whether it's a thumbs up or,
Absolutely.
it'll be okay, whatever it is. So this is really something that a lot of people grapple with after a profound loss, and you're not alone.
No, no. And whatever, as Greer, as you say, whatever brings you that peace and whatever brings you contentment, that's fine. You just need to seek it out. And just adding on that, it's okay to be angry at God.
Yes.
I remember having this conversation with my spiritual leader, and he said, it's okay to be angry. God's expecting you to be angry. And it's how you turn that anger into something more positive and something that brings you peace, whatever that may be.
Right.
So that's definitely a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, talking of losses, there's the loss of relationships.
And identity. Identity is a big one.
Identity's a very big one. I mean,
I feel like as we're going through the process of a profound loss, it really, I went from a we to a me.
mm-hmm.
And that was really hard. I even still, over 3 years later, find myself saying, we did this,
Right.
we did that. Well, I mean, I it was me. I did that. It might have been a plan that Jared and I originally, decided,
Right.
but the reality is I did it.
Yeah.
And that is still odd. Um, I as I've had to think about who am I now? What is my purpose? Kind of going back to the faith piece. And I still don't know, but I don't know if I ever really knew.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly. I mean, for me, Mark and I were together from when we were both seniors in high school. So for me, I had most of my all of my adult life up until he died, we had been a we. It was Mark and I, and we were, and then your identity, so I was like, my identity was I'm someone's wife, I'm someone's mother, I'm someone's daughter, I'm someone's friend, I'm an only child, so I cannot be someone's sister. But then all of a sudden that's gone, as you say, and it's like, oh gosh. So what happens to my identity now? Am I just and you kind of get lost in this identity crisis and I think it's fine that you still say we. It's still fine to feel that you're still part of that we. But you do over time, you evolve into your own identity, who you are as a person. I became Simonie and not Simonie and Mark.
Right. One other way that I think my identity changed It's very interesting. I went through a leadership program. This was years ago before I was pregnant with Jack, before I became a mom. And it was really fascinating because I believe it was for the first 2 or 3 months, we were not allowed to talk about our jobs.
Mm,
We were not allowed to share what we did professionally. We had to connect with our classmates in this program on other things. And I was always very career oriented. And it taught me that we don't always have to ask someone, what do you do for a living? So often that's the first question. Well, right now, when I get asked that, I don't know how to answer that. I'm kind of figuring out what my professional future looks like.
right.
I'm now a podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't told people that when they ask me what I do, although now I will because I totally want to plug Grief and Grit.
Right.
But it we define ourselves so much by these roles that we have, whether it's professional or societal, whatever it is. And I think in general, we have to stop doing that.
Right.
So, bigger picture here, it helps.
Yeah, yeah. And and just I always say that if Mark had to know the person I've become, A, he wouldn't believe it. B, I don't know if he'd really like me now. But I think at the end of the day, he would be proud of who I have become. And I think just going back to the financial side of it, if he had to see what I have accomplished and what I now know, he would definitely not believe it. So yeah.
I second that for Jared. Hands down.
They just don't know.
Uh-uh.
And we as people don't know where you're going to grow to and
Right.
how you're going to evolve. So that's something that's always moving.
Mhm.
And just allow yourselves, to all our listeners, just allow yourselves to grow with that and to
Mhm.
become organically who you meant to be. There's no hard and fast rule.
Right.
Yeah.
And through the identity change and figuring out who we are after these profound losses, there's also, somebody mentioned earlier, the loss of relationships,
Oh,
the
yeah.
loss of friendships. That's a big one.
Huge.
And I know, after Jared died, I realized who was in my corner.
Right.
And I realized who was more of a surface level friend, who was more of an acquaintance. There are no hard feelings towards anyone. At the end of the day, death is uncomfortable and a lot of people can't handle it. But this is my life. This is my every moment of every day. Has been impacted by this. And finding the people who are comfortable with me still talking about Jared.
Mm-hmm.
That was key. Something else that I discovered pretty early on, Saturday nights were really hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
Friends were starting to finally get out of the house, from COVID, and they were going on
Right.
date nights. And
Right.
I was stuck in the house with two little kids that were 3 and 4. And I missed feeling human and feeling alive. I missed having those social interactions with friends. I missed going to out to restaurants, and
Right.
I learned that I needed to articulate exactly what I needed. So I told my best girlfriends, I don't want to be alone on Saturday nights.
Right.
And so they started either including me in the dinners, or at least one of them would come over so that I could have some adult time. And that helped so much. But they wouldn't have known had I not said anything. And I know that when we go through situations like this, and I also experienced it after the loss of the baby. Does someone invite me to the baby shower or not? Does someone invite me to the group friend dinner with all couples or
Mm-hmm.
not? And the reality is, some people will get offended by being invited because they feel it's insensitive. And then other people are offended that they were left out because that's their friend group, or they want to attend the baby shower. And the reality is those that are not in our head are damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. And by recognizing what we need and articulating that to our people helps reduce the friction and the assumptions and frustrations on both sides.
100%. I couldn't have said it better. Like, they need to know. You need to be vulnerable enough to call up a friend and say, I don't want to be by myself tonight. Come on over, just as you did. And I think that's important because resentment can become a big part of friendships. You resent people who don't include you. You resent people who don't get you. It becomes, as you say, it causes friction. So, yes, it's important to let people know from the get-go what it is you need, and your needs change. Your needs change over time, over years, and it's important to keep having those conversations with friends, letting them know that you need X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Very important.
Right. And I know oftentimes in widowhood, unfortunately, there are situations where you may not have a continued relationship with your spouse's family. I'm very lucky in that I do have that relationship.
I do too.
And we maintained relationship, and we love each other dearly. But that's something that is really tricky. And I think as people are experiencing this, and I'm not in the situation, so easy for me to share advice on it. However, it goes back to having that support system. You need a strong support system. You need your friends. You need your people in your corner as you're going through these really challenging, unthinkable situations. So that is definitely
and I think we can speak to, with relationships, we can speak to, there's secondary losses in loss of friendships, not necessarily a person physically dying, but they are losses that people feel, so and so was my best friend. We did everything together. We went to high school together, college together. And now all of a sudden that friendship has deviated. It's either you've changed, your friend has changed, certain situation brought about this breakup. And that is very real. It doesn't mean that that person has passed on. It just means that it's now a different kind of friendship and you mourn that loss.
Right.
You mourn that loss. It could be a colleague at work. It could be a friend. I mean, it could
divorce.
be a divorce.
That's a huge one. There's so much loss and grief and mourning that goes into a divorce. Again, it's the loss of your hopes and dreams. It's the loss of oftentimes, having your rock, that support system. They're not that person anymore.
Right.
So yeah, there are so many of these losses that apply that don't have anything to do with a death.
Absolutely. And they're huge and they're real and they're losses that you are entitled to mourn and grieve, just as a person is who's physically lost someone to death.
Right. These are transformative losses.
Exactly. And they affect our
and
they affect our day-to-day living. I mean, you look at something like the loss of a home. Whether it's physical, you lost a home because there was a fire and the whole house burned down, or you lost a home because financially you couldn't pay the mortgage or you couldn't pay the rent anymore. That is a huge loss, and that goes together with that loss of identity, that loss of self-confidence. You have confidence when you own your home, you rent your home. Those all go together, and that doesn't necessarily mean that someone physically died, but you physically lost your home. So there again, you go through the grief and the mourning period and all the identities and all the emotions that come with it.
One of my dear friends, her parents recently decided that they were going to sell their home, which is her childhood home. And she was really struggling with it. And she couldn't really figure out why. And I told her, I said, "You're mourning a loss.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big deal. That house had meant so much to you. And that's where you became who you are."
Correct.
So again, there could be so many different reasons
Correct.
for the loss, but it's real. It's real.
It's so real. And then, like the loss of a job.
Yes.
That's a huge one because that, whether it's the company closed down or the company was taken over and your position is no longer required. That is a huge loss, and that does so much to a person. Again, it's intertwined with that loss of independence, that loss of confidence. What did I do wrong? So much of, a loss of a job can bring about anxiety, depression.
Right.
These are all losses, and these are all to be treated
Yes.
in the same way that you would treat the physical loss of a person through death.
Well, and it goes back to kind of what I said previously about how so often in our society, we define ourselves by what we
Correct.
do. We go out and, we're at a party. Oh, what do you do for a living?
Mhm.
And that's really hard. It's the first question that's asked. It's not, where are you from? Or have you traveled recently?
Oh, what food do you like to
What are
eat?
your hobbies? What do you do for
It's
fun?
always.
What do you do for a living?
Yeah.
And that really puts a lot of pressure on us as people. And it is very, very crushing to confidence levels, especially when the job hunt is not going the way that we
Correct.
want.
Correct.
So again, lean on your cheerleaders. Let them lift you up, whoever those people might be. But you really do need them in this time.
Absolutely. And the same applies to, you have the loss of health.
Yes, that's a big one.
That's a big one.
Mhm.
And, all of a sudden you've gone from this healthy, energetic, living your best life, and you get a diagnosis and it's terrible. And
Right.
it stops you in your tracks, and suddenly you have lost that person who just yesterday was healthy and living your best life, and you're now confronted with the unknown and all this anxiety and all the fear. So definitely loss of health it's a huge one
And
because it intertwines
yeah,
with
it
everything
does.
that we spoke about.
Right. Well, sorry. And I was going to say you saw this with Mark.
Correct.
And what he was experiencing. And then I know for me, when I was widowed, my own health and mortality was my biggest trigger because all I could think about was my kids need me because Jared's not here anymore. Like they have to
Exactly.
have one of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And loss of health, it's terrifying for so many different reasons.
And the loss of health can also be someone who you lose, but through an Alzheimer's or a dementia diagnosis.
Yes.
The person is still physically alive, but the actual person that is no longer living.
Yeah.
And no longer the person that you knew, that you loved, that you spent time with. So that is a huge loss. That's grieving someone while they're still alive.
Right. Right.
And I think that impacts so many people. I know for me, I have friends whose parents have been through it, and it's really tough because you mourn a living person.
You are. And oftentimes you might even be put into that caregiver role.
Yes.
So being that close to it, and it can be physically and emotionally exhausting watching that loved one suffer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So these are many of the secondary losses that people experience through profound loss, such as losing a spouse or a partner and beyond.
Exactly. And these are just a few that we touched on today. We both know, and for everyone out there, that every loss that you have is significant.
Yes.
Just losing a pet is significant
Yes.
and sad.
I know.
So there are so many losses, but I think our biggest takeaway is just allow yourselves to mourn and grieve whatever loss it is, and never think that your loss is small and insignificant because so and so had so much more happen to them. That's not how life works. Whatever is your loss, whatever you are going through, that's for you, and that's huge in your world. And no one shares the same grief. No one shares the same losses. No one shares the same reactions to how it's going to be. So take your time, be gentle on yourselves, go through the mourning process, and as you've seen, you do come out of it.
Right.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can pick your life up, and we do move forward, because that's what we as humans do. We are born with resilience.
It's so true. And the loss of our first pregnancy and the loss of Jared, both of those helped me find my voice. If you knew me when I was younger, you knew that I was not outspoken. For those that know me now, they might be like, what? But it's really hard, especially for the introverts out there and for those that are more private. But I will tell you, the burden that we have to find our voice, once you have found it, it is powerful. It helps to talk to people about what you want and need. Again, no two grievers are grieving the same way. As Simonie said, it's unique, and we can't assume that people know what's going on in our heads and in our hearts. So, by telling people, or at least those closest to us, what we need, find that one person in your life that can be your megaphone. It helps tremendously.
Absolutely. So we hope that this helped, and reach out to us if you have any questions, if you ever have any suggestions. And again, you can find us
on griefandgritpodcast.com and all places where you can listen to podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and beyond. And we will be back with more new episodes soon. October, we're actually going to be focusing on pregnancy and infant loss awareness. October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. So I will be sharing more of my story, and we will have some special guests. This will be our first time having special guests on the show. So we're really looking forward to it. And we hope that people find it helpful. So please share with your friends, share with others who may be going through a difficult time in their life. We are here, and they can reach out to us. They can listen to Grief and Grit, but we're here.
Okay,
So
have
we'll
a great
talk to you
day,
soon.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you love what you heard, please follow Grief and Grit and share our podcast with your friends and family.